Before the Titanic disappeared beneath the Atlantic, an old Irish legend says that the devil himself tried to board the ship, and when they refused to let him on, he left them with a simple warning: you'll never reach New York. Now, one of my favorite legends surrounding the Titanic is also one of the strangest, and it's a story that supposedly took place just days before the ship disappeared beneath the North Atlantic. Now, because according to an old Irish legend, before the Titanic began its final voyage across the ocean, the devil himself tried to board the ship. Now, I want to be clear right from the beginning. This is folklore, all right? I haven't found enough historical evidence to present this as established fact. So just enjoy the story. But what makes the story so much more fascinating is that it's connected to a very real place on a very real day during the Titanic's final stop just before sailing into the open Atlantic. It was April 11th, 1912. The RMS Titanic had arrived off the coast of Queenstown, Ireland, known today as Cobh. Now, this would be her final port of call just before beginning the long journey west toward New York City. And because the harbor was too shallow for the massive ocean liner to dock directly at the pier, smaller tender ships carried passengers out across the water to board the Titanic. And according to legend, somewhere among those passengers appeared a man dressed in entirely black. No one seemed to know who he was or really where he came from. He didn't have any family with him or anything. He was just by himself. And some versions of the story describe him as unusually tall, thin, and almost sinister looking. There was something about his face that made people uncomfortable and remember him. Something about the way that he carried himself that just didn't seem quite human. And then, according to darker versions of the legend, someone looked down and noticed at his feet something was very wrong with them. And what exactly they supposedly saw changes depending on, really, who tells the story. But the rumors spread that this wasn't a man at all, but in fact, it was the devil himself. For reasons that have been lost to time, the mysterious stranger was supposedly refused passage, and he would not be allowed to board the Titanic. And as the enormous ship began pulling away from the Irish coast and heading west towards the Atlantic, the figure in black supposedly stood out, watching them from behind. And then he shouted a final warning at the ship. He said, "You'll never reach New York." And then just 4 days later, the Titanic was at the bottom of the North Atlantic. Now again, this is where history and folklore become tangled together. We know for a fact that the Titanic made her final stop at Queenstown on April 11th in 1912. We know that she took on her final passengers right there before sailing west. And we know that 4 days later, during the night of April 14th and the early hours of April 15th, she struck an iceberg and disappeared beneath the freezing Atlantic. But the mysterious man in black, well, that's where history falls silent and legend begins to take over. Because strangely enough, this isn't the only supernatural story surrounding the Titanic. Now, let's not get into whether the Titanic was really sunk by an iceberg or for other reasons. We'll save that for another day. But in the years following the disaster, stories emerged passengers who supposedly had terrible premonitions before boarding. Others spoke of strange dreams and warnings. Some even claimed that the Titanic was doomed before she even left Europe. Now, maybe these stories were simply created afterward by people trying to make sense of a tragedy so enormous that it almost seemed impossible to comprehend. Or maybe the man in black was just that, a man. Someone whose identity was lost to history, whose strange appearance slowly transformed through decades of retelling the story into something supernatural. It happens. But there's something haunting about imagining that final day in Ireland. The Titanic sitting majestically offshore, passengers being ferried across the water, families waving goodbye from the Irish coast, having no idea that they were watching the ship sail toward history. And somewhere among them was a mysterious figure dressed in entirely black, standing silently at the water's edge, watching the Titanic disappear into the Atlantic. Now, knowing somehow that she would never reach New York. Let me know what you guys think in the comments and if you've heard about this before.